In October 2019, on a stretch of Blackwater River deep in the Brazilian Amazon, a group of fishermen did what fishermen have always done in that ancient, breathing wilderness. They pointed a camera at something that should not have been that large. The footage that emerged from that morning spread across the country within days, and the man who filmed it laughed at his critics, saying that people had always called stories like his fisherman's tales. What they had captured, still, coiling, impossibly thick, was a green anaconda, Eunectes murinus, the largest snake Brazil has ever produced, moving through the shallows as though the river belonged to it. The jungle remembers what the rest of the world forgets. For thousands of years, the Amazon basin's waterways have been home to creatures that dwarf every polite expectation of what a living animal can be, and the green anaconda sits at the apex of that bewildering scale. The 2019 footage did not invent a legend. It confirmed one, briefly and imperfectly, in 10 seconds of shaky handheld video that nevertheless changed the tone of every conversation about how big these animals truly grow. To understand what those fishermen saw, and what the Amazon conceals in far greater numbers than cameras ever catch, the story must begin not with a single snake, but with the ecosystem that built it. The Amazon basin covers roughly 5.5 million square kilometers, a living architecture of river, swamp, dense forest, and seasonal floodplain that creates conditions found nowhere else on Earth. Within that immensity, the green anaconda found its perfect world. Marshes, oxbow lakes, slow-moving tributaries choked with vegetation, and the kind of absolute silence that allows a 7-meter ambush predator to simply disappear. The Eunectes murinus, the name itself translates roughly from Greek as good swimmer, is a member of the boa family, which means it kills not with venom, but with the slow, crushing arithmetic of constriction. Its body is built for water the way a warship is built for the sea. Heavy, low, and shaped for one purpose. The head is broad and flat, the nostrils and eyes perched high so the animal can breathe and observe, while the rest of its body remains invisible beneath the surface. This is not a creature that chases. This is a creature that waits. The 2019 video gained national traction in Brazil, not simply because of the snake's size, but because of the reaction of the man who filmed it. He had grown up near the water. He had heard these stories his entire life, and he had watched city people and educated outsiders dismiss them as the predictable exaggerations of men who had nothing better to do than invent monsters for their river. Now he had footage, and his commentary was not triumphant so much as wearily satisfied. The vindication of someone who never doubted the river but had long grown tired of explaining it. What the video shows, when examined carefully, is a green anaconda of considerable but not impossible size. Biologists who reviewed the footage in subsequent media coverage placed the animal at somewhere between 4 and 6 meters. Substantial, certainly impressive, but well within the documented range for mature female specimens of the species. Female green anacondas are dramatically larger than males, a phenomenon called sexual dimorphism that in this species reaches extremes unusual even among large constrictors. A large female can weigh over 250 kilograms and reach lengths that strain the tolerance of any measuring tape that has actually touched a living animal. And therein lies the problem with every conversation about maximum anaconda size. If stories like this pull you in, subscribe now, because we're only getting deeper. The difficulty in confirming maximum anaconda length is not a failure of science. It is a failure of opportunity. These animals live in precisely the kind of terrain that defeats systematic study: deep marshes, flooded forest, river channels tangled with submerged vegetation where a 7-meter snake can vanish as completely as if it had never existed. The Wildlife Conservation Society once offered a significant cash prize for a verified specimen exceeding 30 feet, roughly 9 meters, and despite decades of the offer remaining open, no qualifying animal was ever produced. That absence of proof is not, however, proof of absence. The Amazon does not submit to bounty hunters. Local accounts from communities along the Rio Solimões, the Rio Javari, and the serpentine tributaries of the Juruá consistently describe animals in the range of 8 to 10 meters. These are not isolated exaggerations. They come from ribeirinhos, the river people, men and women who have navigated these waters for generations, whose relationship with the natural world is not mediated by field guides, but by direct, daily experience. When a ribeirinho fisherman says he saw an anaconda as long as his boat, and his boat is 8 meters, the scientific community's instinct to apply a discount factor may be less an act of rigor than an act of cultural condescension. The forest remembers, its people remember, and the river keeps its largest tenants hidden beneath surfaces that do not offer easy measurement. Understanding how an encounter with a green anaconda actually unfolds requires setting aside both the cinematic version, all lunging and screaming, and the opposite error of imagining these animals as passive and slow. In reality, the anaconda's hunting strategy is one of the most energy efficient in nature. The animal positions itself in shallow water near the margin of a bank, a sandbar, or a cluster of aquatic vegetation, and then it simply becomes part of the landscape. The wait can last for hours, sometimes days. The animal's metabolism is slow enough that a large meal sustains it for weeks, which means there is no urgency, no impatience, only the absolute concentration of an apex predator that has learned it does not need to move until the moment is precisely right. When that moment arrives, the strike is not what most people expect. The anaconda's lunge is short, rarely more than its own body length, and extraordinarily fast, a kinetic explosion from an animal that spent hours being a rock. The bite itself, delivered by jaws lined with recurved teeth angled backward into the throat, is not venomous. It is, however, ferociously effective. Those backward curving teeth mean that any prey animal that instinctively pulls away from the bite drives the teeth deeper. The prey animal cannot pull free, and before it understands what is happening, the coils have already arrived. Constriction is frequently misunderstood as a process of crushing, of breaking bones and compressing lungs through pure brute force. More recent research suggests the mechanism is more precise than that. The anaconda's coils respond to the prey animal's heartbeat, tightening fractionally with each pulse until the cardiovascular system simply cannot overcome the pressure. Death comes not from shattered ribs, but from circulatory arrest, a process that, in large prey, may take several minutes, but is essentially inevitable the moment those first coils secure their grip. The Amazon does not waste energy. Even its killing is efficient. The natural prey of a large green anaconda spans a remarkable range. Capybaras, the world's largest rodents, which can themselves approach 50 kilograms, are a documented and common prey item, taken from river margins where the rodents gather to drink or cool themselves. Caimans, including younger specimens of the spectacled caiman and, in documented cases, animals approaching 2 meters in length, appear in anaconda diet studies with enough frequency to dispel any notion that these snakes are passive or prey-limited. Deer, large birds, and in the regions where their ranges overlap, even the occasional smaller tapir have all been recorded as anaconda prey. The size of the prey is limited only by the size of the snake, and as females continue to grow throughout their lives, that ceiling keeps rising. It is in the context of prey size that the folk accounts of 10-meter anacondas shift from pure mythology into something more troubling and more interesting. An animal of 6 meters, fully grown, weighing over 200 kilograms, is already pushing the boundaries of what most people can viscerally accept as real. Scale that up to 8 meters, a size that multiple biologists have acknowledged as biologically plausible given the species' life history and the nutritional richness of Amazonian waterways. And the animal enters a category that no longer has a comfortable reference point in modern human experience. Scale it further to the 10 and 12-meter animals that Ribeirinho communities and indigenous testimonies continue to describe, and the creature begins to feel less like a known species and more like a thing the Amazon invented specifically to remind humans of their place. Indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin have lived alongside anacondas since before recorded time, and their relationship with the animal bears no resemblance to the fear-based narrative that outsiders tend to project onto it. Among the Yanomami of the northern Amazon, the anaconda, called the amarok in some regional dialects, though names vary between communities, occupies a position in cosmology that is not exactly reverence and not exactly fear, but something more complex, a recognition of kinship. The snake is understood as a guardian of waterways, an entity that predates human presence in the forest, and that exercises a form of territorial authority that human communities must negotiate rather than confront. The Disana people of the Colombian Amazon describe anacondas as the physical embodiment of rivers themselves, the living form of the water's power, capable of transforming into human shape during shamanic ceremonies. When Western scientists arrive with measuring tapes and express polite skepticism about maximum sizes, they are entering a conversation that has been happening in a different register for thousands of years, and the jungle's original interpreters did not need the length confirmed to understand what they were dealing with. The behavior of anacondas near human settlements along major tributaries has generated a body of encounter literature that is difficult to dismiss, even when individual accounts are impossible to verify. Fishermen working net lines in Igapo, the seasonally flooded forest, report feeling coils brush against their legs in water they cannot see into. Women washing clothes at river margins, a common practice in riverside communities, describe watching the surface just meters away develop the specific kind of purposeful, directed movement that is categorically different from the drift of a current or the push of wind. These encounters rarely result in attacks. The anaconda, in most cases, slides away when it registers the presence of a full-grown human, and most biologists are clear that unprovoked attacks on adult humans are exceptionally rare events, not the defining feature of the species. But exceptionally rare and never documented are two very different categories, and the documented cases that do exist are sufficient to explain why the communities that share the water with these animals maintain a particular quality of attention when they step into the river. The question of whether anacondas have ever killed adult humans is answered differently depending on which sources you consult. Herpetologists studying Eunectes murinus in controlled conditions and field surveys tend toward a conservative position. The species does not typically pursue humans as prey, and verified cases of human predation are vanishingly rare or entirely undocumented in peer-reviewed literature. But peer-reviewed literature requires verification standards that are essentially impossible to meet in remote Amazonian communities where the nearest medical examiner may be 5 days upriver. The communities themselves report occasional tragedies: a child, a woman alone at the water, a man who went to check a fish trap before dawn and was found 2 days later or was not found at all. Whether these accounts constitute evidence of genuine predation or represent misattributed drownings and the narrative gravity of living next to an apex predator, the Amazon declines to clarify. It keeps its accounting private. The 2019 video belongs to a tradition of visual documentation that began the moment cameras became small enough to bring into the field, and that tradition has produced a persistent and interesting pattern. Footage of very large anacondas is rarely clean. The light is always wrong, the angle is always imperfect, the camera is always moving. This is not suspicious. This is exactly what genuine wildlife encounters in Amazonian waterways look like. Sudden, close, unplanned, conducted by people whose first instinct is not to adjust their focus, but to make sense of what they are seeing with their own eyes. The consistent quality of these videos, the same imperfect light, the same inadequate angle, the same animal that seems too large to be what it plainly is, argues not for fabrication, but for the biological reality of a species that routinely grows to sizes that cameras in shaking hands are not equipped to document. What biological science can confirm about Eunectes murinus places it at a remarkable intersection of documented fact and lingering mystery. The species is officially recognized as the heaviest snake in the world by body mass, though the reticulated python of Southeast Asia competes for the record of greatest length. Maximum confirmed body mass for a wild-caught specimen sits above 250 kilograms. Maximum confirmed length in a scientifically measured wild specimen is subject to debate, but generally cited at around 5.2 to 6 meters, with credible reports from professional field researchers extending that range towards 7 and occasionally beyond. The gap between 6 meters and 10 meters is not a small gap, but neither is it an insurmountable one, given the species' continuous growth pattern, the extraordinary nutritional abundance of the Amazon basin, and the mathematical certainty that the largest living specimens of any secretive species are almost certainly the ones that have most successfully avoided human contact. The habitat itself deserves sustained attention, because it is the habitat that explains everything: the growth, the elusiveness, the persistent impossibility of establishing firm size records. The Amazon basin during the wet season floods millions of square kilometers of forest, creating a seasonal inland sea where trees stand in 10 meters of water, and the entire floodplain becomes a single connected aquatic environment. For an anaconda, this is paradise. The prey, capybaras, caimans, deer, large birds, are all forced into proximity with the water. The snake's aquatic advantage is maximized. The visibility, from a human observer's perspective, drops effectively to zero. A large anaconda in flooded Igapo habitat is not hiding. It is simply operating in an environment that makes it invisible by default. The specific regions where the 2019 encounter occurred, along tributaries in the Amazonas state, represent some of the most anaconda-dense waterways on the continent. The lower Solimões and its tributary systems, the floodplains of the Juruá, and the marshy margins of the Japura have all generated consistent reports of very large specimens over the past century. These are regions where the primary economy is still fishing, where communities maintain intimate knowledge of the water, and where the concept of a very large anaconda is not a sensational event, but a familiar, if always sobering, fact of life. The forest guards these tributaries carefully. Roads do not reach them. The rivers shift course between seasons. Any systematic study of anaconda populations in these zones would require years, considerable resources, and a tolerance for conditions that make even experienced field biologists reconsider their assumptions about physical hardship. Beyond the question of size lies a more nuanced and perhaps more important question: what is the actual behavioral range of a species that has had essentially no natural predators in its adult phase and has inhabited the same ecosystem for millions of years? Younger anacondas face predation pressure from caimans, large birds of prey, and jaguars. A jaguar, the Amazon's apex terrestrial predator, will take a juvenile anaconda without hesitation and has been documented wrestling and killing animals up to 3 or 4 meters in length. But once a female anaconda crosses a certain size threshold, somewhere around 4 to 5 meters, the research suggests, she exits the category of potential prey and enters the category of environmental fixture. Nothing in the Amazon eats a 6-meter anaconda. Nothing challenges her territorial claim on a stretch of river. She moves when she chooses, eats when she is ready, and grows continuously, year after year, until the forest absorbs her back into itself. It is this biological reality, continuous growth, no adult predators, nutritionally rich environment, effective invisibility, that makes the gap between confirmed records and community reports less a credibility problem and more a logistical one. The animals that have been measured are the animals that were caught. The animals that have grown the largest are, by definition, the most experienced, the most cautious, and the most difficult to approach. A very old, very large female anaconda in the upper Solimois floodplain has had decades to learn the specific signatures of human presence. The sound of an outboard motor, the chemical trace of a person in the water, the particular quality of disturbance that precedes danger. She does not need to flee dramatically. She needs only to descend 3 feet. The river does the rest. Western science's difficulty in establishing firm maximum sizes for Eunectes murinus is not a weakness unique to this species. The largest individuals of most wild species, particularly those in remote, inaccessible habitats, are systematically underrepresented in biological literature precisely because they are the ones that have most successfully avoided the conditions under which they could be documented. This is a known sampling bias with a name in the literature, the Bigfoot problem, sometimes called the rarity of the truly large. The largest tiger ever recorded was shot by a hunter in 1967. The largest crocodilian ever verified was killed during a culling operation. The largest specimens of known species almost always enter the record through death, not through careful scientific observation of living animals in their habitat. An anaconda of truly exceptional size, alive and healthy, and operating in the interior of the Amazon basin's flooded forest, may simply be beyond the reach of verification by any methodology currently deployable in that environment. The Ribeirinho communities and indigenous peoples who share the anaconda's watershed are not troubled by this epistemological gap. They know what they have seen. They know what their parents saw and their grandparents before them. The river's accounting does not require peer review. The Marubo people of the Javari Valley, one of the most isolated indigenous territories on Earth, describe encounters with anacondas that would, if taken at literal face value, describe animals approaching 10 meters in length as normal features of their river landscape. Not monstrous exceptions, but simply very old, very large examples of a creature they have coexisted with for as long as their oral history extends. The Javari Valley contains over 800 kilometers of protected river territory, where anaconda populations have never been commercially hunted, and where human density is among the lowest on the continent. If an anaconda anywhere on Earth is going to reach the size that folk accounts consistently describe, the Javari Valley is where it is going to happen, and the people living along those rivers are the ones who would know. The 2019 video was not the first and will not be the last. Footage claiming to show exceptionally large anaconda surfaces with regularity on Brazilian social media and regional news channels, and each emergence touches the same nerve, the collision between what institutions have formally established and what people who live on the water have always known. Some of this footage is fabricated. Some is genuine but misidentified. Reticulated pythons, large caimans, even submerged logs have been offered as evidence of record-breaking anacondas, but some of it, a small, persistent, stubbornly consistent body of visual and testimonial evidence, describes something that the biological parameters of the species do not rule out, and that the Amazon's verified inaccessibility does not make impossible. The jungle keeps producing witnesses. It has not yet produced a specimen on a scale that satisfies the institutions. That conversation is ongoing, and the river has not yet said its final word. What should a person do if they encounter an anaconda in the wild? The answer, according to both herpetologists and experienced ribeirinho guides, is essentially the same. Maintain distance, do not enter the water near the animal, and understand that in the vast majority of cases, the snake has no interest in you. An anaconda of any size that is not actively defending itself or in a feeding response will typically move away from a human. Slowly, with an air of mild inconvenience, as befits an animal that has spent millions of years at the top of its ecosystem's food chain. The bite, if it occurs, is not venomous, but the recurved teeth cause deep lacerations, and the backward angle means pulling away drives them deeper. The correct response is to push toward the animal, not away, to reduce penetration. And constriction, once established, is addressed not by trying to unwrap the coils, which tighten in response to the prey's cardiac output, but by supporting your own ability to breathe and calling for immediate assistance. These are not theoretical scenarios for the communities of the Middle Solimois and the Jurua. They are transmitted knowledge, passed from parents to children, encoded in the practical intelligence of a culture built on intimate familiarity with the water and everything it contains. The forest continues to reveal. In 2022, an anaconda measured at 7.9 meters by a research team in the Ecuadorian Amazon, if confirmed, would represent the longest scientifically verified specimen in recent history. That measurement is contested, as all large measurements are, but the direction of the evidence is interesting. Rather than converging on a lower maximum, the documented record for the species has, over the past 2 decades of improved field methodology and camera technology, been creeping steadily upward. The record is not shrinking. The Amazon is not running out of large snakes. What is running out at an alarming rate is the habitat those snakes require, and that more than any difficulty in verification may be the most important thread in this entire story. Deforestation, agriculture, mercury contamination from illegal gold mining, and the disruption of seasonal flood cycles have reduced anaconda habitat in accessible areas of the Amazon by a proportion that biologists describe with quiet alarm. The large specimens, the old females, the record holders, the animals that carry within them the biological memory of an intact ecosystem, are specifically vulnerable because they require large territories, large prey, and the specific quality of undisturbed habitat that only the deep interior can still provide. The same interior that prevents their documentation protects them. The rivers that make them invisible keep them alive. Every road that cuts closer to the uncontacted territories, every tributary that receives the runoff from a new cattle pasture, every season that floods less deeply than the last, each of these is a small reduction in the conditions that produce the giants. The largest anaconda in the world may be alive right now in a tributary of the Javari or the Upper Jurua, in water that has never been tested for contamination because no researcher has ever reached it. The Amazon does not make it easy to know what it contains. That is not a failure, it is a feature. An ecosystem of that complexity, that age, that abundance, does not owe its inventory to any camera or any institution. What the 2019 video gave us was a glimpse, imperfect, brief, shaky, and therefore completely authentic, of the relationship between the forest and its most formidable resident. The fishermen who filmed it were not surprised. They were vindicated. The surprise was reserved for everyone who had been comfortable assuming that the Amazon's most extreme possibilities were always exaggeration. The snake that crossed that stretch of water in October 2019 has long since returned to the deep. It is there now in all probability. in the flooded forest of the rainy season or the quiet margins of a slow tributary, waiting with the absolute patience of a creature that has no concept of time as an enemy. It is not hunting, it is not hiding. It is simply being what it is. The largest snake in the world, in the largest river system in the world, in a forest that has been practicing the art of concealment since before our ancestors stood upright. And somewhere upstream, in a tributary that has no name on any map, a larger one is doing exactly the same thing. The Amazon keeps its accounting private. The river does not surrender its largest residents to cameras or to certainty. But every decade, the evidence shifts slightly. A video here, a field measurement there, a Ribeirinho account that matches another one from 100 kilometers away. And the gap between what institutions confirm and what the forest insists is true grows a little narrower. Perhaps the record will be officially broken in a laboratory somewhere, the specimen stretched on a clean floor beside a calibrated measuring tool. Or perhaps the largest anaconda the Amazon has ever produced will live its full span, undocumented, will die in black water no one has named, and will return its mass to the ecosystem that built it. And the river will simply continue, keeping its own counsel, as it always has. If the hidden truths of the Amazon's rivers draw you in, the creatures that exceed expectation, the communities that have always known what science is still catching up to, the vast green world that guards its most extraordinary residents from casual confirmation, then this channel is where those stories surface. Subscribe to Secrets of the Amazon Jungle and let the river take you deeper than any map dares to mark.